Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar where we'll be discussing construction contracts, insurance, and reserves, what you need to know. I have the pleasure of being here with David Haber as well as Renee from Epic Engineering. We're going to give everybody a few minutes, about a minute or two to log in, and then we'll get the webinar started. So again, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. We're going to do our best to go over a series of questions that we have and address some of the questions that came to us prior to your registration, or I should say during your registration to the webinar. And we're going to provide you a jam-packed webinar with a ton of information with regards to contracts, insurance, and reserves. For all of those of you just logging in, we're giving everyone just about a minute to get logged in so we can get everyone that registered to our webinar on and live. We have the pleasure of having Renee as well as David for Haber Law here with us today. We'll be doing some formal introductions in about a minute, and we'll get started with the webinar. Again, the webinar is going to be focused on construction contracts, insurance, and reserves, what you need to know. There's been a lot that has occurred over the past 2 to 3 weeks, even though it feels like it's been much longer. And we're going to do our best to address the questions that were provided to us while you register the webinar, as well as the challenges that we each have seen from our own industry and how we're addressing those challenges and what we're doing to be able to support our board members, managers alike. So if you give us just about a few more seconds, we'll get started. All right, I think the numbers have gotten steady. So I think it'll be a great time. All right, perfect. I think it'll be a great time for us to get started. So my name is Rafael Aquino. I'm the CEO of Affinity Management Services. Again, we want to welcome you to today's webinar on construction contracts, insurance, and reserves. I have the pleasure and honor to be seated here alongside two excellent and industry experts within our industry. So why don't we do some formal introductions, and I'll get started with the left side of my screen. Renee, if you could say a little bit about yourself and the firm you represent.
Hi, I work with Epic Forensics Engineering, and we're a forensics firm. And what that means is we really do property condition assessments, determine causation, and get to the root of the problem so that that is what is repaired versus just fixing what is apparent. We are in all over Florida, have threshold in-house inspections, and we provide services such as turnovers, repair, construction, and also owner representation during construction.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Renee. Next up, we have here David Haber with Haber Law. David, if you can tell us a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Thank you, Rafael. Can you hear me first of all?
Loud and clear.
Okay, good, because without that, there's no introduction. My name's David Haber. I'm board certified in condominium law. I also do about 50% of my work in construction litigation. Haber Law is a 17-lawyer firm specializing in real estate, construction, business litigation, and condominium law. And unfortunately, I've been called upon a lot lately to address the issues that happened in Surfside, Florida, as I'm sure Renee and Rafael have as well. And we're hoping that we can answer many of your questions regarding construction and insurance and certifications so that you have some more information than when you started today.
Thank you very much, David. As for myself, I'm Rafael Aquino, CEO of Affinity Management Services. We are a community association management company. Our market is Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach County. We're more of a boutique operation. Our core focus are looking for partners, board members, I should say, that are really looking for that personalized service and can guide them through difficult times and be able to provide the knowledge and the resources to address the concerns that they have. So enough about us. You know, what has occurred, or I should say it did occur in the past 2-3 weeks with Champlain Tower has been something very sad and tragic to many. I know it has impacted each of us in one way or another. We've had either family member or friends or someone that we know that has been impacted by what occurred in Champlain Towers. So the way we see it, and I'm sure David and Renee would agree with me, is that, you know, we need to honor those individuals who have lost their lives and making sure that this, you know, never occurs again. So that's what we're doing here today. And, why don't we just really get started? So, David, I know you've been really involved with what's going on as you opened up. It's been sad that this has occurred, but at the end of the day, you've been an expert. You've been asked to be quoted in several newspapers, several articles. Could you give us a little bit of what you believe the future is going to be as it relates to 40-year recertifications and the impacts to the buildings?
Yeah, thank you, Raphael. I think we're going to see significant major overhauls to the condominium statute. I've been asked to write an op-ed piece for the New York Times, which should be coming out this week. And as you said, I've been in the Herald, the Sun Sentinel, the Washington Post, and the Wall Street Journal, unfortunately, as a result of this tragedy. I think one of the things, nobody knows what happened with the Surfside collapse. We do know that the garage the pool deck went down first, and then, of course, the tower came down. But none of us know whether it is just because of lack of proper maintenance and waterproofing and the concrete spalling in the garage, or whether it's a design defect, or whether it's a combination of the two. That'll be left for forensic experts such as Renee to deal with in the coming months and years to figure out the cause or multiple causes of that tragedy. But what do we know about that condominium that we need to really scrutinize? Number one, they didn't have proper reserves. They waived reserves year after year after year. And then, of course, it started with, we're going to have a $7 million assessment. And then it turned into a $15 million assessment. And then the politics of it got to the point where it took 2.5 years before they passed a special assessment. And of course, they didn't do preventative maintenance for the 30 or 40 years before then, or if they didn't do a good job of it, because they had no waterproofing on the deck ultimately, and they had a slab that needed to be replaced, and they had spalling columns, and Renee can talk about all that. What do I see in terms of legislative changes? I see 40-year certifications becoming 10 or 20-year certifications. I see certifications every 5 years thereafter. I see boards needing to reserve, and it either becoming impossible or highly difficult, extremely hard to waive reserves for life safety items. What are life safety items? Renee could talk about that better than I, but it's basically fire safety, electrical safety, and of course, structural safety. And I think it's going to cost more to live in condominiums, because instead of people being able to move into a condominium and kick the can down the road 20 years for someone else to pay the bill, if you come to the buffet table, you're going to pay to eat. It's no longer going to be kick it down the road and 30 years from now, someone gets a $15 million special assessment. And the reason for that is anybody who has served on a board knows no owners want to hear it's going to cost more money. And so they fight, they argue, they typically slander you and defame you through either written or verbal communications, either at board meetings or letters to the owners. They make management out to be the devil, and it creates an untenable situation. So I think we're going to see a lot taken away from boards and put in the hands of engineers like Renee to decide in the certification what needs to be done, file it with the local municipality, and then there's going to be a time clock ticking, and you're going to have to get that work done to the satisfaction of the engineer. And there's going to be no more cutting corners. There's going to be no engineers that are going to say, well, maybe you can do it this way and you cannot do that part. I don't see Renee or any engineers doing that going forward. So those are the things I mainly see right now, and Renee can talk about it from an engineering perspective.
Excellent. Thank you, David. And you bring up some great points. I hope that what you're saying does become a reality, because we've seen it over the years, and it's been said dozens of times of kicking that can down the road. And the reality is unless there's someone holding these boards accountable, things aren't going to move in the direction that they need to move. Now, it's not the case for every single board, but it is the case for a significant amount of them. And it's unfortunate that what has happened recently, we need to get to that point in order for things to be corrected. Renee, from your side, from an engineering side, what changes do you see that could come about with regards to from the engineering side and as well as maybe on the reporting side? I'm sure there's going to be more caution when you're turning in these reports and what you're disclosing within these reports.
Well, I think what really is going to change is the liability that the engineer has and where his allegiances are. And let me explain. David was absolutely right when the engineer gets involved and tells the association what to do. But the problem is the engineering, professional engineering, our license is held to the general public, the safety, not just the client. We really have to look at the public safety, which means that in the past, when there was a crack and it was delayed, we would say, okay, well, you should do this, but go ahead and put on the priority for this year. And then this year passes, it doesn't get through. And then we come in, hey, listen, we really got to fix this. And we try to convince them. Now it's going to be to the point where if we do see some structural issue that is affecting the structure of the building and will cause an impact to public safety, if the associations decide not to do anything, the engineer, what I see and what I hear is going to start happening is they're going to start going directly to the city and putting the city on notice that there is a structural problem here. That's something that engineers really, in the industry I've heard, don't really like to do because they're really going against their own client. But yeah. I see now that because of what's happened, there's going to be way more liability, way more pressure on the engineer to make that and pull that trigger and make that move to the city against the association, unfortunately.
And Rafael, I think it's also going to put pressure on the management companies.
Oh, yeah.
You're going to see reports from management. You guys write weekly or monthly, what I call condition reports.
Yeah.
And there's not going to be management companies sitting there month after month after month after month saying, do this, do this, do this, and them staying on. You're going to see management companies quit if these boards don't do what they're supposed to, because you look at a catastrophic situation and it could be a fire. It doesn't have to be a building collapse. It could be a fire where people get hurt or die. Whichever way it goes, everybody is now enlightened to the fact that tragedy can occur when you don't take care of life safety issues. And I think management, more than anybody, is on the front line. And people need to listen to I think that the bottom line is you need to listen to your experts. You need to listen to your accountants on how much you have to reserve and your reserve study specialists. You need to listen to your engineers on what you need to do in order to do continuing maintenance. And you got to listen to your lawyers when they tell you need to get this done or you have big liability issues. Because as we see in Surfside, everybody in the sphere is going to get sued. The lawyer, the engineer, the board, everybody, the insurance agent for insufficient insurance. And I'm sure the management company, if there was one as well.
Correct. No, and you said it right when you opened up that costs are going to go up. And you're completely right, David, when you mentioned about that. Management companies are going to have a sharper eye out and they are going to put their associations on notice. This has shown that the responsibility of what occurred is going to fall on everyone that touched that particular building. And it's no different, as you stated, if there's a fire, the same thing is going to happen. I know I can speak for us that we're already, having certain things within our contracts being placed so that there's more protection, because ultimately we can only do what our boards allow us to do. And if boards are not going to take the direction that's right and correct, then we may have no choice but to let go of that client and move on to another client, because no one wants that on their hands, right? For something like that to occur.
I don't think any of us, the three of us, if advice is ignored, we're going to let people know we're not going to continue to work with you, because I'm not going to get sued when that tragedy, if God forbid another tragedy occurs, whatever kind of tragedy is.
Correct. And as you stated, it's the industry experts that you have to make sure that you're working with, that understand our industry, that know what's going on, because there's a ton of attorneys, and just like there's a ton of management companies and a ton of engineering firms, it's making sure that you're working with the right one. So with that said, Renee, I'm sure a lot of people have gone into the world. I know for the legal side, you have attorneys that are condo certified. In our side of management, it's pretty easy to find out who's, they have their cab license per se. In engineering, I'm sure if you have a structural license, you can kind of, do the structural work. What's your recommendation for property managers right now that are, wondering of how the inspections that need to be done, what steps should they take, and who should they be hiring for those inspections?
Well, first of all, it seems really simple, the answer, and that is you should hire somebody that's qualified to do what you're asking them to do. For example, if you need a property condition assessment done on your property to determine what needs to be fixed, why are you hiring an engineer who specializes in designing plans and specs? You need to focus on somebody who focuses on property condition assessments. Property condition assessment, forensic engineers, and plans and spec design guys are two totally different areas.
Yeah.
So they're two different things, and they're specialized for a reason. You want somebody that really goes into the causation of the problem. Where a forensic engineer looks at a crack and says, hey, why is that crack occurring? I'm not going to just fix the crack. I'm going to fix the planter that's 7 stories away that's leaking into an expansion joint that's coming down and causing that crack to happen. What we've seen is a design engineer will go there and say, oh, you got a crack? Sure, fix the crack, done. What happens a few years later, the crack gets double, and not just that, but every crack that's hidden within that expansion joint is now getting worse and worse and worse and worse because it wasn't seen. So you really need to vet your engineering firms, go through their priorities, go through their track record to see what they specialize in. And guys, don't get tied up in these engineering firms that they have 100 or 5,000 employees. Chances are those guys have 3 or 4 or 5 people that do property condition assessments. Really focus on the engineering firm that has the staff dedicated to providing the causation and the repair, the correct repair for the causation, not just with that hand.
Now, following up on what Renee said, you had asked me earlier about legislation. I'm going to recommend to the legislature that anybody doing certifications should have a minimum of 10 years experience if it's a structural engineer in structural engineering, and as Renee said, and I hadn't even thought about this, in doing property assessment reports, in order to avoid people just running out and getting a letter from someone that may not be qualified. Correct. I think you need to be qualified in the area that you're looking at, and the same for MEP engineers. So I think yes, you need a certification at an earlier point in time, but you got to also look at from whom, and then what's the follow-up. Renee said best, we're now, we are held to a standard to the public, not just to the client. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the politics of this is going to come out of this. It's going to go away. There's going to be no more pushing the management company and the engineer to, cut corners, or let's put off the waterproofing of the planters for a couple more years. That's not going to happen anymore. And I don't think people realize how important waterproofing is to concrete. And I'm going to let Renee speak specifically about that. But in my op-ed, I wrote, waterproofing is as important to concrete as brakes are to a car.
Yeah.
You don't have brakes, you got a problem. You don't have waterproofing on concrete, you have a problem. And here is the dilemma for boards. One of your goals is to keep property values high and obviously increase the quality of life. We now have to add the third element to that triangle, which is protecting life safety. The problem is nobody ever sold a condo for an extra 10 or 20 or $30,000 because they waterproof the planters in the garage. People pay. I mean, let's be honest. What do people pay for? They pay for the lobby tile. They pay for the carpeting in the hallways. They pay for the beautiful wallpaper. They pay for the inside of the cabs of the elevator. They pay for the beautiful chaise lounges next to the pool. Nobody goes into a garage and starts looking at columns to see if they're spalling.
Correct.
However, and I'm going to let Renee, I'm going to talk about the next item next, but I want Renee to talk about the concrete issue.
Yeah, I mean, we have been part of associations where after a settlement that we've given them a list of all the issues that they need to repair in their building. Not just a list, but we've prioritized it. We've made, here's what you need to do. Here's when you do your contract for construction. Here's what needs to be in it. Here's what you do this year. Here's what you're going to put into reserves for next year. Here's what you're going to put in reserves for the next 10 years so that the money that you got in your construction defect case settlement, you can move on and do the repairs. 4 years later, I come to the property. They got the most amazing lobby. It is gorgeous. However, the concrete corners of the balconies are still cracked. This is a true story. I'm not even making this up.
No, I believe you, Renee, because you see it, you know, and it's a shame, but the reality is that many things are going to change now. I think the eyes have been opened not only to the world, but also now even people that are purchasing. Right now, their focus is going to change. Realtors are smarter now. Now they're going to request either reserve study or some kind of inspection report, which I want you to touch up a little bit on that baseline review. But they're going to be requesting not only reserves, they're going to be requesting reserve studies. What's the financial condition of the association? While these items have always been available, I think now if you're working with a strong realtor that understands and is looking to protect their client, they're going to be asking for these things. So that's going to change the marketability of that particular property as well. Because if you're in an association that has no reserves, you get an engineering report that tells you things are in bad shape. I would assume that most buyers nowadays are a little bit more intelligent after what occurred, and they're going to say, well, I don't know if this is a good property for me to purchase. You know, so I could totally see that have happening, and we'd see it all the time. But hopefully now with what occurred, things are going to change.
I
Go ahead,
also, in terms of real estate, everybody should get ready for the following. I could tell you, because I'm a condominium lawyer, when I bought a condominium, a vacation condominium, I looked at the reserves, I looked at the budget, I looked at the reserve study, because I know to look for those things. But nobody has ever looked for those things.
Correct.
You're going to see people looking to see, you know, they used to say, is there a special assessment coming? That's the only thing they asked. They never asked what's in reserve, what's been held back for the last 10 years to know that 5 years from now you might have a special assessment. They would never have asked for an engineering report. They would have never asked for a reserve study. I also think you're going to have a lot more requirements for quality control and certification for reserve study specialists for all facets of your building, not just paint, asphalt, roof, but structure. There's going to be requirements to reserve for structure, which have never really been in the eyes of those reserve study specialists, because a lot of them are like, well, how do you reserve for structure? I mean, who's planning on rebuilding the building? So that's going to change a lot. And I think boards are going to end up having to put life safety on the same level as marketability.
Agreed 100%. Now, Renee, there's been obviously a lot of question in the media with regards to, making sure that the buildings have some kind of letter from an engineer or a baseline review. Could you provide our listeners a little bit of an insight of what you're doing at this time with the requirements that you're hearing from different cities or different counties?
Sure. Well, the first thing is you want to see a structural safe letter that you receive. Is it something that you need to give for the city, or are you just giving a structural safe letter for the residents? We're seeing two things come in. One thing is in cities where it's required, the city sends a letter and says you must comply with this, hire an engineer. The engineer has to have a certain amount of experience doing high-rise buildings, and then he writes a letter, an opinion on if your building is structurally safe. Okay, that's just step one, just to get that city out of the way. Okay. But we're getting significantly more of other regions, other counties, all the way up to Jacksonville saying, guys, even though it's not required and we don't have a letter from the city, our residents are concerned. They're the ones that want to know if the building is safe. Let's hire an engineer. Oh, and by the way, we're going to go ahead and hire that engineer with the same qualifications that Miami's asking for. Oh, and by the way, the letter that you write has to be with the same verbiage, the same review, the same engineering expertise as the guys from Miami are doing. So that's a big change in the industry. So what can happen?
Renee, I think we're going to have that Miami-Dade and Broward, Miami-Dade and Broward passed the 40-year certification rule after the 1975 collapse of the FBI building.
Right.
That's going to become a statewide requirement. There is absolutely no
It needs to
doubt that it's going to become statewide, and it's going to be less than 40 years. I would like to ask you a question. And this goes to the issue of waterproofing and concrete, because you really haven't talked so much about, so I'll say it. Concrete is porous. It has rebar in it. The minute water and air get to it, it's going to corrode. It's going to rust the rebar. It's going to expand. It's going to bust off the concrete. Now you've lost structural integrity. So here's my question to you, Renee. When a developer builds a building, they put on a waterproofing, usually with someone who probably doesn't even know what they're doing, and they get a 5 or 7 year warranty on the waterproofing. And of course, we know that the overburden, and so that people know what overburden, it means the tile you put on top, or it means the dirt and the plants that you put in the planter. Ripping that overburden off 10 years later is so expensive, way more expensive to pull it off and put it back, either with the same tile or new tile. Sometimes you can't even put on the same tile.
Right.
What can we do? Because I'm going to be pushing for a building code requirement of a minimum of 15 or 20 years for waterproofing. Can you talk about whether or not they can do that, whether or not that's feasible to change the code that way?
Well, it only makes sense. You're putting a 7 or 8 year product down, and then you're putting a stone tile that can last 30, 40 years. So you see how that just doesn't make sense. It should be the other way around.
Yeah.
So really, David, I mean, you hit the nail right on the head. There are products out there available right now that will give you that longevity, not the 5 year. It'll give you the 15 to 20 plus years. Problem is that it's expensive. But wait a minute, guys. Is it really expensive? It's going to cost 9 times more to remove the tile than it is to install the absolute best waterproofing you can get. We're talking about dollars a square foot more. If it costs you $100 to get there, that's where the expense is. So if you're putting a 5 or 7 year product down and a 40 year product on top of it on the first day, that's really just bad planning. Now, are you going to save a buck? Absolutely. Developers and contractors are saving money by buying the cheaper product now. However, who's paid for it at the end? All the unit owners. The association pays for it at the end.
And that's why I think that even if the existing buildings that we have where developers are no longer on the hook, I think all buildings should have to get a certain minimum code required waterproofing that will last 20 years or more. I think that it's ludicrous for associations to be placed in the position that every 10 years they got to rip it off and spend $2.5 million, or ignore it and let it go 30 years, and then you have a pool deck that collapses.
Correct.
I think that it's just putting a board in a terrible position between a rock and a hard. It's a catch-22. Either do it every 7 to 10 years and your unit owners hate you and start throwing things at you and defaming you, or we've got to get a better product that'll last longer.
Correct. And that's we stated yesterday in our pre-call, David, you made an excellent point, which was making sure that maybe the counties or the cities have these stringent requirements so that the boards don't have an option but to go with a better quality product. I know that the cities and counties haven't been that involved with regards to which products need to be applied. That's always been a decision of a board and the contractor engineer. However, I do believe, as you stated yesterday, that would definitely help out and make it, the board won't have a decision to do so. I know in our experience, what we find is you're always trying to find that right balance. And the only reason why you're trying to find that balance, it's because you don't have the proper funds in your account. If we would have started from day one when these buildings were built, and then slowly and gradually increase the fees 3 to 4%, just like everything else has been going up over the years, we wouldn't be having these kinds of conversations. We'd be having different conversations today. But unfortunately, that's not what the system is designed. The system is designed to allow board members to waive those reserves, or I should say, allow board members to provide the option, and then the owners to waive those reserves. And hopefully, as you stated earlier, that changes, especially for structural and life safety components. So, David, I want to keep it right at you. What do you recommend, especially in light of the tragedy that occurred at Champlain? What do you recommend that boards should be focused on at the moment?
So the first thing I want to talk about in answering that question is insurance. Champlain Towers South had $30 million of property and casualty coverage for the building, with units valued well over $100 million. And you can never rebuild that building for less than $80 or $100 million. They were woefully underinsured. Now, I see insurance going up in terms of cost.
Yeah.
There's no doubt it's going to go up in Florida. You know, everybody was always focused on hurricane insurance, right? Everybody was worried about windstorm. Well, let me tell you, there's a new day, and the new day is catastrophic property coverage. So the first thing I would say is get with your management, get with your insurance broker, maybe even get an outside insurance analyst for $5,000 or $7,000 to protect your board. Remember, experts, experts, experts. Get good experts. And your management company can give you the name of both brokers as well as insurance analysts that don't sell you insurance. They just analyze what you have and say, do you have the right insurance? Do you need different insurance? Are the exclusions appropriate? Do you have a big hole here that you need to fill with a separate policy, whether it's a mold policy, a toxic tort policy? You know, the whole thing with coronavirus was, you know, these exclusions for, you know, and they all came up with exclusions to it. So, you know, they have policies that actually cover that thing if people had bought it. So I see insurance going up. I see the need to check your insurance for your property. Obviously, there's boiler and machinery, which covers some of your equipment. But I also see tremendous need to look at your directors and officers' insurance coverage to protect you as a board member, with everybody scrutinizing what the board does, and then an umbrella policy. You must have an umbrella policy over the top of everything in case, God forbid, something happens. So I see that being huge changes. And I also see you needing to get with your lawyers and your accountants and get a reserve study specialist, as well as Renee said, getting a property assessment specialist. And good management companies like Affinity have the names of people they trust that they've worked with. Don't get a one-off person that doesn't have the experience. That's the best advice I can give. When you go with tried, true, tried, tested people who have been through the wars before, you will get the experience you need. And it may cost you a little extra, but in the end, it's penny wise and pound foolish to go any other way.
Correct. Very well said, David. And with that said, with regards to reports and so forth, Renee, we've spoken a little bit about, you know, the baseline report. You know, I've had a lot of questions with what's the difference between a forensic engineer and a regular engineer. If you can kind of clarify a little bit of that.
Right. So as stated before, a forensic engineer really focuses on causation of the problem and then determines the proper solution. A regular engineer will focus on the actual problem at hand, and it's not really go deep enough to find the root cause. What we've seen is they tend to fix the crack again, but not the issue causing the crack. So that's why it's important to go through somebody who understands the process and knows what the real issues are and gets to the root cause. Because fixing the planter may resolve all of your concrete's falling in the garage. It's that simple.
Excellent. And you know, especially for, I'm sure there's some self-managed properties on our call today. Again, we keep saying industry experts because it's important to know who are those industry experts, and making sure that you're making the right selection. So you're working with the right individuals to get the root cause, as you stated, Renee, resolved. David, you know, we've had a lot of calls, at least from our clients and even prospective clients, where they're wondering, should I even continue to sit on the board? You know, what are the potential liabilities that I may have if something like this happened to me? I guess if you can shine some light from a legal perspective of what board members should be thinking of and what they should be doing to protect themselves.
And that's the toughest question, Raphael, because in light of this tragedy and the board and prior boards being sued, which they will and have been, anybody in their right mind would say, why do I want to do this? I mean, it's a very logical question. So let me give a couple of different answers. Number one, board members are protected for their reasonable business judgment. It's called the business judgment rule. And the reason for the business judgment rule is to not allow some other owner in your condo to try to stand in your shoes Monday morning quarterback and say, well, but I would have done that, not that. So long as it's a reasonable judgment, you have the right to immunity from suit. You have protection under the statute. What takes you out of that immunity? Reckless behavior, intentional behavior, willful misconduct. So things like stealing money, or, and I'll tell you what is considered reckless. Your management company tells you 5 months in a row, there's a balcony that is loose. We need to lock it off and we need to fix the balcony. And the board says, I'm not going to bother with that. That would be considered reckless. So in these hundreds of lawsuits or consolidated lawsuits that are going to come, the question is going to be raised, was the board reckless in not moving to fix the pool deck and the columns earlier? So in light of that, why do you want to serve on a board, and what do you do if you are on a board? I think the answer to that is twofold. One, make sure you have the proper insurance and the proper umbrella to protect you. Number two, rely on your experts. And I keep going back to this. Why? Because whenever a board makes a decision based on expert advice that's in writing, you automatically have the presumption of reasonable business judgment, because you say, I relied on my experts. Here's the report. Here's the letter from the lawyer. Here's the letter from the engineer. I didn't do anything other than what my experts told me to do. That's why I hired the experts. And the final thing is, if you have a financial investment in a condominium, who do you want to leave the decisions to? Do you want to leave it to the other guy or the other lady, the person who may not be competent to make decisions, who may not follow the advice of the experts, who may put you at risk and your family at risk of a life safety problem, or just of financially poor decisions? And so that's the reason to be on the board, is to protect your financial investment and your family's well-being.
And I agree with you 100%, David. The way I've seen it and the way we've been telling the boards that we've had the conversations with is, as you stated, if there was ever a time to serve on the board, it's now. I mean, you have a responsibility, and as long as you're doing what's right for the community, and as you stated, working with industry experts, you're not going to find yourself in a tough situation. You may find yourself in a tough situation where you got to make tough decisions, but who are you going to leave that decision to? To someone else that you don't know if they're going to do the right thing for your community, for your investment. For most people, their home is their biggest investment. So why would you leave that to someone else? And again, there's a sense of pride of doing what's right for at least those that lost their lives. Now is an opportunity for us to really accelerate whatever challenges you may have had within your community, and just let your residents know if you've had it in behind closed doors. Open it up, let them know what's going on, and show them what the reality is. And this may be the opportunity to get what you need to pass, whether it's a special assessment, whether it's a loan, or the project approved. At the end of the day, what this boils down to is proper planning, in my eyes, and I think we've all said it, is taking the time to put these things together. Just because your building's 37 years old, I have 3 more years to get this done. That doesn't mean, okay, I'm not going to do it until I get that letter from the county. The opposite needs to happen. You need to start much earlier, 33 years before, sorry, 7 years before, so that you can get all your ducks in a row, get all the industry experts hired, your attorneys, your engineers, your contractors, get management in order. Who's going to project manage it? Are you going to have an owner's rep? Get everything in order, because if there's anything that this tragedy showed us is the longer you wait, the costs increase exponentially. And that's something you definitely.
Raphael, I want to ask Renee to address the issue of why does concrete spalling, stucco cracking, all these things, why does it become exponential? What is the reason scientifically? Why does it go from, it's a small crack now and it's a bunch of small cracks and it's $1 million and everybody thinks it's $1 million, and then you actually get up there and it's $4 million, because that drives people crazy. So can you address why it goes exponentially?
Right, and it's all because of how much engineering you're going to throw at the project in the beginning. What we've seen is associations say, I only want to have one guy here walk around for a couple hours and just tell me what's wrong, and then do a bid form and say how many cracks I have, and let's get a contractor to fix it. No. Why? Because a 1 foot crack, you're going to write down contractors to repair 1 foot of crack. But what's really happening is when you open that crack, it's really corroded and rusted. The rebar's rusted 3 feet on each side, and next thing you know, it's a 7 foot crack. So now every time you see that 1 foot crack, it really is a 7 foot crack, and you have thousands of these. That's why your $2 million job you hear becomes a $8 million job. So what do? You really need to spend the time in the beginning to do a good baseline assessment of your building. Do destructive testing. You're going to spend more money on a contractor and an engineer up front, but that's going to save you hurdles and change orders in the long run. So have your engineer come in, remove the concrete, because what happens is you get a little crack, salt water gets in there, it reacts with the steel. The steel loves to expand. It expands 6 or 7 times greater than the concrete, than itself. That causes pressure on the concrete and blows the concrete out. Now it's exposed. Now you get saltwater intrusion. It soaks the concrete in saltwater. You have chlorides that love to sit there and react with the steel. And now that concrete starts to fall because of the corrosion that's happening inside of it. The reinforcing steel starts to corrode. And everybody says, guys, why do we use reinforcing steel? Why can't we use plastic or something else? It all is because in Florida, when you have the change of seasons and the hot and the cold days and nights, concrete expands and contracts with temperature. Well, it just so happens that in nature, steel expands almost identical at the same rate of concrete. That's why, I always hear, Renee, why don't we put aluminum in here? Aluminum doesn't corrode. Yeah, but aluminum, when concrete wants to expand this much, aluminum wants to expand that much and then breaks out of the concrete. So that's why we use steel in concrete. Problem with steel is it doesn't like to be exposed, specifically not in a coastal region. It's very susceptible to corrosion, and it really you can't just coat it, because now it doesn't grip the concrete and it won't react together with it. Actually, you get some slippage and you won't get that friction that you need. So it's raw steel. It has some coating on it, but it is in the concrete. And that's why that little crack needs to be addressed immediately, because right now it could be you simply paint it and stop the water from going into that crack. People who say concrete cracks, don't worry about it. No, concrete cracks, the designer. When I design concrete, I know it's going to crack, and I will design for that cracking. However, once you start seeing that crack get wider and wider and wider, you can start sticking credit cards in it. That's a problem. That is not just paint over it. Look, I think what really needs to be done here is that, all this talk about getting your expert, getting the right team, look, that's all well and good. But I think it all starts with a well-informed property manager. I think that's number one. And if I had to tell you guys what the first step as a property manager that you're listening, this is going to save you and save the associations and really get you guys on board. And that comes with really understand your building. I'm not talking about the people. I'm not talking about how it works. I'm talking about the structure. Look, meet with your, and I know I'm changing the subject a little bit, Raphael, but
No worries.
Just this one. Meet with your chief of maintenance first. Let him show you and walk you around all the areas of the stress of the building. He will show you that piece of rebar on the ceiling that is falling down. And what did he do? He painted it white to match the concrete because a board member told him that it looked ugly and it was going to scare people and they wanted to pee. They wanted to not repair it. True story, that just happened about 2 weeks ago. Also, walk your garage. Do you have gutters in your garage? The gutters are there because the water's dripping on the cars and causing damage to paint. And you're simply, well, let's just, fix the gutter by fix the leak by putting a gutter on it and getting that water away from the car. No. Figure out why you have water coming in through the roof. Are there areas in your garage that you keep painting the ceiling of and that paint keeps bubbling? Guess what, guys? That's not bad paint. That is water is coming through your structural slab. Water is soaked in your reinforcing steel, hits the paint, gets trapped, soaks the steel, and then that pressure blows the paint out. Okay, so if you're constantly repainting your ceilings, that's not good.
Let me address that issue with respect to improper maintenance versus long-term maintenance.
Yeah.
There are certain areas of a building that are so exposed to the elements. And remember, we don't live in Arizona. We don't live in a dry environment. I think it's rained every day in Miami since July 1st. And when it rains in Miami, it pours. It pours. We all know that. We also know that we have a salt air environment. And now we know that we have king tides and we have sea level rise. Most of the older buildings are built with underground garages. And most of the older buildings on the water have these balcony slabs that are getting all this air, salt air, day after day after day after day. So you should have a spec for your balcony waterproofing. And that spec should be done by a structural engineer. You should have a spec for your planter waterproofing and your garage deck and pool deck waterproofing. These are the things that protect your structure. They are probably the most important things about your structure is your waterproofing, given the environment, which is very, very destructive and corrosive. Everybody wants to live on the water, but nobody wants to pay for what it costs to live on the water. So I think that that's really important. The other thing I was going to say is, Renee talked about the money up front. Again, it's penny wise and pound foolish. You think you have a $2 million job of stucco delamination and corroded rebar in the reinforcing and having to fix balcony slabs. By the way, everybody thinks it's 2 feet, and then all of a sudden it goes all the way through into your unit, and they have to rip up under the sliding glass door all the way into your unit by 5 feet. That's because Renee will tell you, because I've done this for 38 years, I know what Renee will tell you. He's going to tell you, you have to route it out until you have good steel. You don't get to stop until you hit gold, if you will. And until you hit it, you keep going. So it's really hard to do an estimate up front because contractors on remediation get paid based on lineal foot or square foot. They do not get paid on a lump sum job. No one does a remediation project for concrete, spalling, and rebar and stucco other than on a lineal and square foot basis. So if you do $25,000 of testing on a $3 million job, you're going to get bids and you're going to take the lowest bidder, and then you're going to get change order to the tune of $4 million, and your $3 million job just became $7 million, and the contractor you hired was really not the contractor you should have hired for a $7 million job. So get with your management company and get with your engineer to select qualified contractors. That's number one. Number two, spend the $200,000 it costs for the forensic engineer to test the building by doing drops and then statistically analyzing based on the number of drops they've done, what they think the real cost will be up front. And number three, You better get a good lawyer who knows how to write a construction contract that can protect you, as well as provide penalties for non-performance. And if you heard nothing else today that I've said, do not do a construction project without a payment and performance bond or a surety bond. I don't care that it costs 1% or 1.5%. If that contractor goes out of business, he's taking your money and all of your neighbors' money, and they're going to sue you for not having what should be, and I believe is, the industry standard. You must have a bond in order to protect you from non-performance of the contractor. You agree, Renee?
Absolutely 100%.
So well said, David. You took some of the thunder that I was hoping to bring to the table, but it's all right. Yeah, no, it's all right. It's like David said, especially the most important thing, and we keep saying the industry experts, that bond really weaves out a lot of the contractors. And that's one of the things that we try our best to recommend, because we understand that there's not that many organizations that can actually fulfill that bond. They need to have certain exit assets in their bank accounts. That's going to say about them, the performance that they've done in the past. They're not going to give a bond to an organization that has had lawsuits and a ton of issues in the past. It's an insurance policy for you and your association. Now, there is an associated cost to that. So again, you have to budget within your budget for your attorney for reviewing the contract, reviewing everything that has to go on, the engineer between the destructive testing, which we would highly recommend as well, any project management or owner's rep that you may need, however you're going to handle the management of that. And then you also have to consider your bond whenever you're doing that financing, or if you're doing it through reserve or special assessment. That's a cost that will be passed through to your association. But as David and Renee have said multiple times, it's important that you're factoring all these things when you're doing your process so that it's done properly, because if not, you're going to pay 2 to 3 times fold. I have an actual case study where we spent $40,000 in destructive testing, and we probably saved close to $2 million, because the board was originally going to go with the lowest bidder. They finally listened to the engineer, decided to do the destructive testing. They were very close. I think we were off by maybe 1 or 2%, which it probably would have been off maybe 40, 50%. Just think about it. When an engineer is doing a regular inspection, they're just there with their binoculars. They're doing the best that they can. They do provide contingencies within their numbers. However, you can't expect them to know how long a linear foot, how long a crack is when it's on the 17th floor and they're on the ground floor, or on the roof, or on a drone, however it is that they're doing it. So you have to keep these factors in mind. Again, as we've said multiple times, penny wise, pound foolish. So we're getting close to the end, gentlemen, but I definitely want to ask you guys a couple more questions before we wrap up. I'll start with you, David. What is the best takeaway you would recommend for managers and board members alike?
So for managers, I would say document the conditions and recommend to the board to get the necessary experts and put the team in place, the insurance broker or the insurance analyst, the lawyer, as well as the engineers. And number two, what I would say to board members is listen to your experts, and don't necessarily try to justify your actions to the owners at a meeting. Bring your experts to the meeting. Let them do the explaining. You don't have to be the bad guy or bad lady. Let your experts who have the experience in dealing with associations come to the meeting. Let them make a presentation as to why you need to spend $200,000 on testing, why you need to have a construction contract done by a lawyer, why you need to have a bond, why you need to have an owner's rep. And by the way, let me just talk for 1 second about owner's rep. Raphael's company is not an owner's rep company. They're a management company. The building engineer is a building maintenance person, not an engineer.
Right.
Do not make the mistake of believing that your building engineer is the person to ask about that corroded rebar. No, the building engineer is not the person to ask. And Raphael was correct. When you do a special assessment, you should include, and your lawyers will tell you this, the legal, the owner's rep, the engineering. All of those things get factored in to the cost of the assessment. You don't take that stuff out of regular money. You take it out of either reserve money or you take it out of the special assessment money. And so you have to special assess more, and you have to be prepared for that. But that $250,000 or $500,000 may save you $4 million. I have an association right now that spent $2.5 million to do a job. Actually, it was $1.5. They got change ordered to death by like $1.5 million.
Wow.
And then the city red tagged the job because the engineer didn't provide proper specifications. The contractor didn't pull the proper permit, and the work was done in violation of code. And now they have to do all the work over again, having already paid for it once. So once again, I would say the takeaway is penny wise and pound foolish.
Thank you very much, David. Renee, how should boards prioritize, the projects that they have currently in mind?
Well, first, a game plan has to be made to determine and to spread out the appropriate work to be done at the appropriate time. For example, why are you fixing your roof if your pool deck columns are about to collapse? Why are you updating aesthetics in your lobby if there are structural issues on your property? That's why working close with your engineer will help you get your priorities in order. This will also help you get financial plan in order and in place to get the correct reserves for your capital improvements. It's important to prioritize these items so that you are fixing the structure first, because those are things that today will cost $1, tomorrow they'll cost $15. Get those done first, and then worry about the changing of the color of the lobby tile, for when you have already your building is in order. I'm not saying don't do those aesthetics things. I'm saying get your structural things done out of the way, have your maintenance plan in order, and then once your building is up and running from that viewpoint, then go ahead and do the aesthetics that you want to do.
Excellent. So are there any closing remarks that each of you would like to provide as we wrap up the webinar?
Well, I'd like to give my phone number and my email address for anybody that has questions. My number is 305-379-2400. My email address is dhaber, that's Haber, at haber.law. And if you have any concerns, please reach out. And the only other thing I would like to say is I know people who had family members pass away in the Surfside tragedy, and I was asked by a number of them to change the laws, to make things better, and to take a lot of the decision making and politics away from board members and put it on the experts like engineers and like the government officials to come in and say, if you don't do this, there are either going to be penalties or you're going to have to move out of the building, which we've seen 2 or 3 buildings close down because they just really had safety issues. So get an engineer right now, a qualified engineer that's been vetted by your management company. Get a qualified lawyer. Get the people you need in order to protect your building.
Thank you very much, David. Renee?
Yeah, David, you couldn't have said it any better. Our goal is so that this doesn't happen again. And the building will tell you that it's happening. When it starts to leak on your cars in your garage through the concrete, that's where it starts. Every property, every failure of waterproofing, everything starts with a drop of water coming through a structural slab, a crack propagating from an area that wasn't cracked before. So keep your eyes out, familiarize with your building, get your baseline assessment done on your property so you know exactly where you are today, so you know how to move forward.
Renee said it. I think the way I would rephrase it is your building talks to you.
Yeah.
You need to listen to your building.
Correct. Excellent. Well, gentlemen, it's been it's honestly an honor to be alongside the two of you, both David and Renee. We appreciate everything that you guys have done and you continue to do to improve what's going on today and for tomorrow. On behalf of Affinity, we want to thank all the board members, residents, and managers who attended today's webinar. We will have the webinar up on our YouTube page within the next 24 to 48 hours. I'm sure the firm will also share it with their contacts. If you have any questions or concerns, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or my team. I wanted to thank the team that helped put this together, Maury, as well as Ashley, that worked behind the scenes to make this happen. Thank you all, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a great day.
Hi, guys.
Hello.